Welcome to Game on the Table. And today I wanted to go over the setup and rules of Deep Space D6 by Tau Luder Games, designed by Tony Go. I'm going to be playing this a lot on my channel, so rather than trying to explain things as I go or every single episode, I figured I'd just do one quick explanation video, get you up to speed real quick. So in Deep Space D6, you're the captain of a ship, and here's my ship for this example run, and as the captain of the ship, you're going to roll your crew die every turn, and based on what you roll, you'll get to assign different crew to different stations. That's the basic dice placement puzzle of the game. Let's talk a little bit about what you're seeing set up. For this example setup, well, every time you start a new game, you're going to pull out 2 threats from your threat deck, and I'll go into that a little more here. But for this example, I pulled out a external threat, signified by this triangle here in the upper left-hand corner, and I pulled out an external threat, signified by this square. External threats go on the right side of your board, and their health is tracked using this right-hand red health marker. So as I have more and more threats stacked out, for instance, this orbital cannon or a strike bomber, which has health of 2, so it'll start up on the second row. Or for instance, here's a away mission for rescuing a soldier, things like that. So as I stack up more threats, I'm able to use the board as reference for how I'm tracking my health, how I'm tracking the health of my enemies. Inside of the shipboard is all of the user interface you're going to use to kind of track your status, make your decisions, that kind of thing. So along the top left is your gray track for your hull points. The hull points are the health of your ship. You ever hit 0, your ship basically explodes and you're done. Next to that is a green track for your shields. Shields are kind of interesting in that they take hull damage before your hull does, obviously, but they can also be recharged fully by a single crew member rather than 1 or 2 points per die for an engineer. So basically you can go from 0 shields, recharge with a scientist, all the way back up to 4, which is a pretty good value for a single dice placement. Across the top, we've got the scanner. And anytime I roll, in fact, I rolled pretty badly at the beginning of this video, and I roll these scanner symbols that match that, I have to lock those die up at the top. And if I ever roll a third and place it, I immediately have to draw a new threat, meaning I'm escalating the amount of problems I have to deal with on the board currently. Down below, you see the different stations on the ship, and some of them are a little hard to read because there's a little fold in the board, but I'll go over it. Up at the bridge, we've got our commander die, and if I place a commander, I can actually reassign a die to another face. So I can say, oh, I rolled an engineer, but what I really need today, or in this moment, is a tactical officer to fire some lasers. And the tactical station on the Halcyon is pretty interesting. If you stack a die, every die past your second gives you 2 points of damage as opposed to 1 from your first die. Let's see here. I've also got a med bay, which are these units here. The medical bay is pretty exciting because I can take one medical officer and use them to unlock one of these threat die from the scanner, returning them to my pool. Anything in this return pool is what I'll be allowed to roll next turn in addition to anything that's been deployed. I can also use a medical officer to return things from the infirmary. The infirmary is basically another way to lock up your die. Certain threats will send units to the infirmary, certain actions will, things like that. So getting all of your units out of the infirmary back to your dice pool for a single medical officer is really, really valuable. Next we've got our science station, and from the science station you can assign science die to either recharge your shields from wherever they are to full, or on the Halcyon, apply a stasis beam to a threat. So if I apply a stasis beam to a threat signified by placing the scientist on that die, if I roll my threat die and activate this threat, it's neutralized. Basically, I can skip an activation of that threat. We'll get into that a little more later. Last station near the rear of the ship, we've got our engineering bay, and I can assign engineers here to restore single points of hull, or I can, like tactical, I can assign a second or third or fourth and get an additional 2 points for each additional engineer I assign. Alright, so that covers all our stations. Let's talk about the gameplay loop. And probably the easiest thing for me to do is just show you. So let me just shuffle the top section of this threat deck real quick, just to give you a sense of what's going on. Alright, so here we have an example setup. You'd set your ship up with full hull and full shields. You would set up your returned and infirmary card next to your ship, and then you'd pull the top 2 threats off your deck. And I've pulled a fighter and some invaders. Let's roll for crew. And first thing you have to do before you're allowed to do anything, including use commanders to reassign die faces, I gotta lock anything I rolled that was a scanner. Next thing I can do is basically place my die on stations, assigning them to tasks, things like that, just so I can, deal with threats, heal my ship, recharge my shields, etc. So in this particular example, what I'd probably want to do, since I'm at full health and what I've gotten is a lot of utility options, I'm probably going to use a commander to assign one of these scientists to tactical duty this turn, fire my lasers, do 1 point of damage, clear this threat off the board. Other thing I might do is assign this commander, reassign the scientist to tactical, and I'll assign it to this away mission. And you'll see there's still another red symbol there. There's 2 symbols for tactical officers. So it's going to take another die to fully complete that away mission, neutralize the invaders on my ship. But I can assign a die this turn, and in subsequent turns assign another one. The trade-off being that I can't roll that die anymore. Last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use my medical bay to unlock this threat die, return it to the pool. So at least I'll have 5 dice that I can roll next turn. After I've finished assigning all my die and performing all those actions, I have to escalate, pull out one more threat. This is a nasty one, it's the nebula. And the nebula immediately takes my shields offline. So I'm going to take that marker off and put it on this card just to remind me. But basically, I have no shields. I'll immediately take any hull damage. And then I'm going to roll the threat die, this black die, and any die, any threats that match that activation will go off. So I'm going to do this invaders. I have to send some unit to the infirmary, which means that unit is locked and I'm not going to be able to re-roll it next turn. Which is really unfortunate. And then also, I have to activate the nebula. The nebula is kind of interesting because it does such a damaging effect. Its activations are actually bad for the nebula, good for me. So I rolled a 2. It's going to remove 1 health off the nebula, dropping it down to 1 on this track. And once I clear the nebula off the board, by either doing damage to it or activating again, I'll be able to get my shields back, but they'll come back at 0. So that's kind of the basic gameplay loop. You basically roll through this series of actions over and over again until you've cleared this whole deck out, and it's a pretty hefty deck. And there's two ways to basically finish the game. You can either roll through the deck with these 6 boss cards marked by the circle in the lower right corner, shuffled into the deck, and as soon as the 6th one is drawn, you put them all into play. Basically, each time you draw one of these boss cards, you set it aside and wait. Or you can set these boss cards aside at the beginning of the game. And that's generally how I play. And once you've gotten all the way through this deck, you put these 6 boss cards immediately into play. If you clear all external threats at the end of a round, this deck is empty, and you still have hull points, you win. There's 2 ways to lose. First one being kind of obvious. If your hull points ever get to 0, you're done, because your ship exploded. Or if you can't ever, on a at the beginning of a turn, collect die and roll crew, because everything is either locked, assigned, in the infirmary, etc., in that case, you've also lost the game. Basically, you've run out of crew to do your job. So that's the basic rundown of how to play the basic loop. There's a lot of unique threats and mechanics baked in, but honestly, if you play along with me, or you just give yourself some reps on the game, that's the easiest way to really learn it. So I hope you'll join me. I'm going to try to play this game at least a couple times a week and get some episodes up. Haven't won in a really long time. First episode went up earlier, and it's it's a bit of a doozy. It was a pretty sudden loss. So check that out if you want. I'll leave a link in the description below. Thanks for joining me. This was Game on the Table, and this was how to play D-Space D6.